The inheritance, cyclinheritance. The sky over Urbine was a roiling mass of dark clouds, as if the very heavens sensed the monumental conflict about to unfold. Aragon Shadeslayer stood at the edge of the Varden's camp, his eyes fixed on the imposing silhouette of Galbatorix's citadel. Brisinger hung at his side, its blue blade seeming to pulse with anticipation. Sapphira's massive form cast a shadow over him as she landed, her scales glinting like sapphires even in the dim light. "It is time, little one," her voice echoed in his mind, a mixture of excitement and trepidation coloring her thoughts. Aragon nodded, taking a deep breath to steady himself. This was it, the culmination of everything they had fought for, everything they had lost and sacrificed. The final battle against Galbatorix was at hand. As he mounted Sapphira, Aragon cast his gaze over the assembled armies. Humans, elves, dwarves, and even Urgals stood united. A force unlike any Alagacia had ever seen. At the forefront stood those closest to him, Roran, his face set in grim determination. Arya, her green eyes meeting his with a look of understanding and support. Neshwada, the weight of leadership evident in her bearing but unable to dim the fire in her eyes. With a mighty roar that shook the very ground, Sapphira launched into the air. Aragon raised Brisinger high, the blade bursting into brilliant blue flames. "For Alagacia," he cried, his voice magically amplified to reach every corner of the battlefield. The answering cry from thousands of throats was deafening, a sound of hope and defiance that seemed to make the dark clouds above tremble. The battle that followed was chaos incarnate. Aragon and Sapphira were everywhere at once, striking from the sky with magic and flame, then diving into the thick of combat on the ground. Brisinger sang as it clove through armor and flesh, each stroke backed by the full might of Aragon's enhanced strength and speed. But for all their efforts, for all the blood spilled and lives lost, Galbatorix remained ensconced in his citadel. The Mad King's presence loomed over the battlefield like a malevolent shadow, his vast magical power keeping the Varden's forces at bay. It was Aragon who finally broke through the citadel's defenses, aided by Arya and the elven spellcasters, as they fought their way through corridors of black stone. Aragon couldn't shake a feeling of wrongness. It had been too easy. Galbatorix was up to something. His suspicions were confirmed when they burst into the throne room. Galbatorix sat upon a throne of jet-black stone, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Beside him stood Murtagh and Thorn, their expressions a mixture of resignation and simmering defiance. "Welcome, Aragon Shadeslayer." Galbatorix's voice was smooth as silk, but with an undercurrent of malice that made Aragon's skin crawl. "I've been expecting you." What followed was a battle unlike anything Aragon had experienced before. Galbatorix's power was overwhelming. Fueled by the hundreds of Illuminati he had enslaved, every spell Aragon cast was countered. Every physical attack turned aside with contemptuous ease. But Aragon had not come unprepared. Drawing upon every lesson, every hard-won bit of knowledge from his training, he began to probe at Galbatorix's defenses, not with magic or might, but with words. "Why?" Aragon asked, even as he parried a vicious strike from Galbatorix's black blade. "Why all this death and destruction? What could possibly be worth the suffering you've caused?" Galbatorix sneered, but Aragon pressed on. He spoke of the beauty of Alagasia, of the potential for peace and prosperity. That Galbatorix's rule had crushed. He invoked the names of all those who had fallen: Bram, Ajahad, Hrothgar, Oromos, and countless others. And as he spoke, something began to change. The Eldunari, long enslaved to Galbatorix's will, began to stir. Aragon's words reached them, rekindling memories of a time before their enslavement. Galbatorix's composure began to crack. "Silence!" he roared, his attacks becoming more frenzied. "You understand nothing." But Aragon did not relent. With Saphira's strength flowing through him, he pushed harder, both physically and mentally. He forced Galbatorix to confront the full weight of his actions, the centuries of pain and suffering he had caused. In a moment of desperation, Galbatorix attempted to use the name of names, the word that would give him control over all magic. But in doing so, he left himself vulnerable. Aragon, seizing the opportunity, cast a spell, unlike any he had attempted before. "Understand," he said, pouring all of his will and compassion into the word. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. Galbatorix staggered back, his eyes wide with horror, as he was forced to truly comprehend the magnitude of his crimes. The pain and anguish of every life he had ruined, every family he had torn apart, every dream he had crushed, all of it crashed down upon him at once. With a scream of agony and despair, Galbatorix used his final moments to cast one last spell. "Waisaniat," he cried, "be not." The resulting explosion was cataclysmic. Aragon barely had time to throw up a shield before the wave of energy washed over them. When the dust settled, Galbatorix was gone, his body and spirit obliterated by the force of his own spell. The silence that followed was deafening. Aragon stood, battered and exhausted, scarcely able to believe that it was over. Saphira's mind touched his, her relief and joy, washing over him like a soothing balm. But their victory came at a cost. Much of Urban lay in ruins, and the loss of life on both sides had been staggering. As the reality of their triumph set in, Aragon knew that the real work was just beginning. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. There were wounded to heal, cities to rebuild, and a kingdom to reshape. Neshwada was chosen as the new ruler of Alagasia, her wisdom and strength making her the ideal candidate to lead the land into a new era of peace. Aragon found himself at the center of it all, his powers and wisdom sought after by all. But even as he worked tirelessly to help rebuild, a growing realization weighed heavily on his mind. The land was changing. With the fall of Galbatorix and the release of so much wild magic, Alagasia was becoming a place where beings of great power, like Aragon and Saphira, could no longer safely dwell. It was Arya who finally gave voice to what Aragon had been feeling. "You're leaving, aren't you?" she asked one evening as they stood, watching the sunset from the highest tower of the rebuilt Ilaria. Aragon nodded, his heart heavy. "I have too," he said softly. "For the good of Alagasia, and for the future of the dragons." The decision to leave was the hardest Aragon had ever made. He would be leaving behind everything and everyone he had ever known, Roran and his new family, the Varden comrades who had become like family, and Arya, whose companionship had come to mean more to him than he could express. But he knew it was necessary. With the Ildunari and the dragon eggs rescued from Galbatorix's clutches, Eragon and Saphira had a responsibility to ensure the future of the dragon riders. They needed to find a safe place, far from Alagasia, where the dragons could grow and thrive without fear. The day of departure dawned clear and bright, as if Alagasia itself was bidding them farewell. A great crowd had gathered to see them off, humans, elves, dwarves, and Urgals alike. There were tears and words of gratitude, promises to remember, and to honor the sacrifices made. As Eragon prepared to board the specially constructed ship that would carry them down the Edda River and beyond, he turned for one last look at the land he had given everything to save. His eyes met Arya's, and in that moment, a lifetime of unspoken feelings passed between them. "Perhaps," Arya said softly, "our paths will cross again someday." Eragon managed a smile, though his heart ached. "I hope so," he replied. "Until then, may the stars watch over you, Arya Dirtning." With those final words, Eragon boarded the ship. Saphira, her massive form dwarfing the vessel, took to the sky above. As they began their journey down the Edda River, Eragon allowed himself one last look back at the shore. The sight that greeted him took his breath away. Hundreds of people lined the riverbank, and as one, they raised their voices in a song of farewell. The melody, hauntingly beautiful, seemed to carry with it all the love and gratitude of Alagasia. Tears streamed down Eragon's face as the shore receded into the distance. He had done it. He had fulfilled the legacy of the riders, defeated Galbatorix, and brought peace to Alagasia. But the cost had been high, and the road ahead was uncertain. As the ship sailed on towards the unknown, Eragon felt Saphira's mind touch his. Her love and unwavering support flowed through their bond, a balm to his aching heart. "We face this new adventure together, little one," she said, her mental voice filled with both excitement and tenderness. "As we have faced everything else." Eragon nodded, squaring his shoulders as he turned to face the bow of the ship. The future was uncertain, but he was not afraid. He was Eragon Shadeslayer, dragon rider, and whatever challenges lay ahead, he would meet them head-on. As Alagasia faded into the distance behind them, Eragon allowed himself to hope. Hope for the future of the land he was leaving behind, hope for the new generation of riders he would help to train, and hope that someday, somehow, he might return to the place he would always call home. The sun set on the inheritance cycle, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson. But for Eragon and Saphira, it was also a dawn, the beginning of a new chapter.